Good evening. Nice to be back in the same room and to actually see people and not palm trees. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Kama Daf Pei Zayin. What? I know.
We look better than palm trees. In fact,
You guys look better than palm trees. You do. We're learning Daf Pei Zayin. It's actually a pretty well-known daf, as when we get to the Mishnah in the middle of the page on Pei Zayin and Aleph, you'll see a lot of familiar ideas. But we're starting about 12 lines or so from the bottom on Pei Vav Amud Beis. Let's continue with the Mishnah that we were analyzing. The Mishnah had said, "Hamavayish es hasuma." This is quoting the Mishnah at the top of the page. Just glance up. Hamavayish es ha'arim, hamavayish es hasuma, hamavayish es hayoshen chayev. If you embarrass someone, even if the person is blind, which is the example of the Gemara, the halacha is that you're patur. Masnisin delok Rabbi Yehuda. That's obviously not like Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Suma ein la boshas. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that a suma, not that he has no busha emotionally, but it just means halachically that he doesn't get paid for being embarrassed. We are on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Beis, about 11 lines from the bottom of the page at the two dots. The Kachaya Rabbi Yehuda potro, it should be potro. He would pater the summa from all of the following: Mechayve galios, that if a summa were to inadvertently kill, he would not be sent into galus. Umechayve malkios, that in a case where a person who can see would have otherwise been obligated in malkos, a person who's a summa would not. Umechayve misos bezdin, and as well, if a person who was a summa did an act that would otherwise have brought about a chiyuv misas bezdin, because he's a summa, he's pater. My time of Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda have this seemingly odd shita that really kind of separates out a summa from regular halachic observance / in this case onshin? He says, Gomar einecha me'edim zomim. We have two psukim. One pasuk says, "V'katzosas kapa lo sachos einecha." The other pasuk says, "V'lo sachos einecha nefesh b'nefesh, ayin b'ayin, shein b'shein, yad b'yad, regel b'regel." And the Gemara says that because of this gzer shavim edim zomim, what do we learn? 10 lines from the bottom on Pei Vav Amud Beis, mahasam summa lo, just like in that case a summa would be pater, av hacha summa lo, also in these other cases he'd also be pater. This drasha is a little difficult, av hacha summa lo, from Edim Zomamin back to the case of Vikatzosa, and it doesn't really explain how we got to all of those halachic areas of exemption that Rabbi Yehuda felt was true by a summa, and therefore the Gemara goes through each of the various cases that Rabbi Yehuda had already said that a summa would be pater from. Mechayve galios. How do we know that if a summa, a person who's blind, inadvertently kills, that he isn't sent to galus? To Tanya, the pasuk says below re'os. In context, it's a little bit of a longer pasuk. The pasuk says, "Oh v'chol even asher yamus ba below re'os v'yapel alav v'yamos v'hu lo oyev lo v'lo mevakesh ra'as." So the word below re'os, prat lesuma. This comes to exclude a summa di Rabbi Yehuda. The pasuk is talking about killing someone shelo b'kavana. If you kill someone shelo b'kavana, so normally you go to galus, but when it says the language of below re'os, that is an exclusion for a summa. That is what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rav Meir argues the exact opposite, and we're going to get into why they argue. Rav Meir Omer, no, it's the exact opposite. L'rabos es asuma. It is to include a summa into the isser of galus. So therefore, we have a machlokes tanoim. If a summa were to kill inadvertently, would he go to galus, yes or no? Rabbi Yehuda says he would not because he's a summa. The pasuk excludes him. Reb Meir would say, yes, he does, because the pasuk includes him. Now we have to see how each of them learn the psukim. Says the Gemara 7 lines or so, 6 lines from the bottom of the page on Pei Vav Amud Beis. My time of Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say that a summa is pater from going into galus if he accidentally kills? Amar lach, Rabbi Yehuda would explain that if you have a friend who's coming into the forest, he's coming there to chop wood, and as he does so, the handle, the nashal habarzel min ha'etz, that the handle of the axe falls off. That's not very good. You don't want that to happen. And in this case, it killed someone. So the pasuk seems to say, "Vasher yavos re'ehu." If your friend comes into the forest, a very broad language of who might be the one coming into the forest. Ve'afilu summa. We would have thought from the pashtus of this pasuk that a summa is included. However, kasav rachmana below ra'os limeute. And Rabbi Yehuda looks at the words below ra'os and says that because the baseline of the pasuk that speaks about V'asher yavo esreu bayar seems to be even a summa. It must be that the words below Ra'os is lemeute. I Reb Meir. What would Reb Meir do? We understand how Rabbi Yehuda got to the position that a summa would be pater from going to galus. So he says, Reb Meir says, Kasav Rachmana below Ra'os lemeute. That is miut number one. And v'chasav Rachmana bivli da'as lemeute. That's a double exclusion. And when we have a double exclusion, it triggers a very important halachic rule, and that is have a miut achar miut. Ve'ein miut achar miut ela lerabos. It's kind of like two minuses. When you multiply two minuses, you end up with a positive number. So when you have a miut achar miut, when you have two miutim in the same halachic sugya, it has to be lerabos. So whereas Rabbi Yehuda seemingly doesn't learn miut achar miut, we'll see why he doesn't in a moment. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says that you're going to be pater from galus because we only have one miut, which therefore excludes the summa. However, Reb Meir says it's miut achar miut because we have below Ra'os and bivli das. Rabbi Yehuda, 3 lines from the bottom. What do you do with the limud of Reb Meir, which seems to be pretty rock solid, that it's miut achar miut? He says, don't worry, hi bivli das. When the pasuk says bivli das, that's prat lemiskavin huda asa. That's coming to teach us to exclude a case where someone has particular kavana. So the point is that bivli das is not another miut. It's talking about a different halachic issue, and therefore there is no miut achar miut. Yes, Rabbi Yehuda does agree to miut achar miut. It's just that this isn't a case of miut achar miut. All right, so then we've explained what the machlokas is between Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda in regards to Mechayve Galus, where Rav Yehuda holds that a summa who kills inadvertently is pater from Galus, and Rav Meir holds that he'd be Chayiv in Galus. What about Chayve Misos Bezdin? So there the Gemara has a very simple Gzera Shava. Asya Rotzeach Mechayve Galus. So we have our primary limud, which seemingly is the case of Mechayve Galios, and we have Rotzeach from one world to another, and therefore we learn Chayve Misos Bezdin from Mechayve Galios. What about Chayve Malkios? How do we know that a summa would be pater from Malkos? We know, let's just talk about a classical case scenario where I eat something that I should not eat, and there's a chiyuv Malkos on me, there's Edem, and I did the Isser perfectly. An Avei Lishma, I did it perfectly. That's not really an Avei Lishma, but I did it perfectly. So the Gemara says, Chayve Malkios, Asa Rasha Mechayve Misos Bezdin. This is very interesting. We have cascading Gzeros Shava. We have our initial one of Einecha. We have the one by Mechayve Galios, which is a little bit more of a complex limud. Then we have the one about Mechayve Bezdin, and then we have Mechayve Malkos, learning from Mechayve Bezdin. So each one is connected to the other in what might be considered a tenuous way, but halacha actually deems it to be a perfectly valid Gzera Shava. This is an important rule in regards to Gzera Shava. You can build Gzeros Shava from one case to another, assuming that the first one is correct and that the second one's also correct, and therefore the third one's also true, because that's an example like we see here. Tanya Idach. Tanya Idach, we have another brisa about Rabbi Yehuda in regards to a summa. Last line of Pei Vav Amud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, summa ein lo boshes, a very similar idea, that when it comes to a summa, there is no din of boshes. As we turn to the top of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, v'chein hay Rabbi Yehuda potro mikol dinim shebatorah. This is broader. On the previous Amud, Rabbi Yehuda simply said that there were a certain collection of onshin that would not apply to a summa. This is even bigger. Seemingly, it applies to every single halacha in Chumash. My time at Rabbi Yehuda. Why would Rabbi Yehuda say that a summa is pater mikol dinim shebatorah, seemingly mitzvos aseh and lo saseh? Amar Kav shafetu ha'ida bein hamakeh uvein hagoel adam al hamishpatim ha'ele. So this is what the drasha is. Kol sheyeshno b'maka uvegoel hadam yeshno b'mishpatim. Anyone who has shaykhs to the onshin of makeh and goel hadam, so then those people are shaykh by mishpatim. Kol she'eino b'makeh uvegoel hadam. But if there were to be a person, and this person that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about is a summa, if we have a summa who's not shaykh by the world of makeh and by goel hadam, then eino b'mishpatim. And that means that a person who's blind, and we know that there were great Amoraim who were blind. We're going to learn about one of them, as we've already learned many dozen times actually. Rabbi Yosef was blind. We'll learn about him soon. But he was pater. Mikol Torah Kula l'chora. That's a fascinating idea. Does that mean he can do Isurei D'Oraisa? I don't think so. I don't know. He's putter from the essays. He's putter from onshinan isurim and putter from doing mitzvos asay. But l'chora, while there may not be an onesh, l'chora there's still an isser involved in doing a ma'aseh isser.
Typically, putter means.
Putter avalasser, right?
Right, can't do it, there's just.
Yes. We use the same language over here that potro mi kol dinim shebetorah, but potro by mitzvah saseh means you have no chiv.
Correct.
So a little bit of a different language.
We called in very difficult language.
Well, potro, as it relates to the losa says shabo is potter avalasser. Yeah. Yeah, because potro is a language of b'diavad. It's not a language of lechatchila. Okay. Tanya Idach, another brisa, 5-6 lines down on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Suma in Laboshes, same idea, third brisa, second brisa plus a Mishnah actually. And here Rabbi Yehuda says that he's pater from Boshes. V'chein higher Rabbi Yehuda potro mikol mitzvos ha'amuros batorah. Slightly different language than above, and this is a whole new ballgame. This is even broader than the previous one. Pater is pater avalasser, like we were saying earlier. This seems to be potro mikol mitzvos ha'amuros batorah. I don't know. Balabatish, that just sounds like he's completely exempt from keeping halacha. That's what it sounds like. Any other thoughts on that? It seems like it. Okay. Amar Rav Shisha B'rei Rav Idi, my time at Rabbi Yehuda. Why would Rabbi Yehuda say that a summa is pater mikol mitzvos ha'amuros batorah? Because Amar Kra ve'ele hamitzvos hachukim ve'hamishpatim. Kol sheyeshnom b'mishpatim, yeshnom b'mitzvos v'chukim. V'chol she'enu b'mishpatim, enu b'mitzvos v'chukim. Very simple drasha. I mean, simple in a way. It's a very simple drasha to read the words. And what it basically means is that a summa is going to be pater from mitzvos v'chukim. Mitzvos v'chukim in the drasha is limited. That's only mitzvos asay. Usually chukim or shatnez, whatever falls into the category of a chok. But lemaisa, it seems that mitzvos and chukim are pater. Okay. Amar Rav Yosef, who was blind, Mereish, initially in my first limud of this sugya, says Rav Yosef, and we're a third of the way down on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, Hava Amina, I would have said, Man de Amar halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda, the one who says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, who again not Rav Meir. What did Rabbi Yehuda hold? The Amar Summa Pater Mina Mitzvos Ka'avdina Yom Tova L'Rabbanan. I would make a whole kiddush and shul. I was so excited because initially he said what I thought was, if a summa is pater for mitzvos and I'm doing them, I have a great reward. My time, because the lo mafkedina, I wasn't obligated. V'ka'avdina mitzvos, and I was doing them. But the hashta de shamas lahad Reb Chanina. Once I came across the din of Reb Chanina, that I made an error, says Reb Yosef, in how I understood the model of halacha when you're not technically obligated. Hashta de shamis lahad Reb Chanina. The amar Reb Chanina. Gadol hamitzuva ve'oseh, mimi she'enu mitzuva ve'oseh. Now that I know that the reward is greater for those who are commanded and fulfill a mitzvah, as opposed to those who are not commanded and fulfill a mitzvah, then I would say, Man de amar li ein halacha k'Reb Yehuda avdina yom tova l'Rabbana. Because he was blind and he wanted to find the greatest way for him to do the reward. So if the din was taka like Rabbi Yehuda, that assumes pater mina mitzvos, and if it's true that not like Reb Chanina, that you get more reward just for doing something even when you're not obligated. So then he wanted the din to be like Rabbi Yehuda, because that was ideal for him. But if the din is like Reb Chanina, that gadol hamitzuva ve'oseh, then he doesn't want to hear that the din is like Rabbi Yehuda, because then there's no way for him to be a lechatchila yid. Yes, he can fulfill mitzvos, but it's never going to be gadol hamitzuva ve'oseh. And if we say not like Reb Chanina, that would mean that a woman should pursue every mitzvah that is available to her, even those that are not shaykh to her. So tefillin, which is complicated, I don't know, lulav and esrog, tzitzis, we don't really see these things so much. We see shofar, we see a couple of them that we try to be very makbid on. The Maisa with tefillin, it's a little bit complicated. The poskim discuss. There was a big debacle a couple of years ago with a school in New York that let some girls put on tefillin. I don't know if you saw the principal penned a whole article about it. Ayin Sham or don't be Ayin Sham, but it's a fascinating discussion. The poskim discuss it. You're right. It's a mitzvah saseh, and a mitzvah saseh shehazman grama. A woman is allowed, and it may even be commendable under certain circumstances for a woman to do, maybe. But there are some secondary limits to these issues, nida, whatever the case may be. Okay. So yeah, and then my time. Why is it that he wanted it to be that the halacha was not like him? Because the chi mifkedina isli agrat fe. He said, had it been that the din was not like Rabbi Huda and that the din was like Rav Meir, that I really had a chiyuv as a summa, then I would have gotten more schar. So from a schar perspective, after he learned about the din of Reb Chanina, he always wanted it to be that the halacha was not like Rabbi Huda. So says the Gemara. Fascinating discussion about blind people and halacha. One should just be careful in repeating these when there are those around who can't see. And also there are some fascinating halachic things about how we define a summa. What if you have someone who is legally blind without their glasses? Like, do they fall together summa? How high on the chart do you have to see to not be a summa? Or does summa mean I can see zero? Probably not, because I would imagine there were, I don't know. I'm just saying, what are the gradations of summa?
You have to be blind like a bat?
I'm asking, I'm not saying, I'm asking, because back in the day, there were people who were keha'enav, they couldn't see well. We still refer to them as blind. Yitzchak, and the Torah discusses by Yaakov and Esav. Huh? Cataracts, potentially, whatever the issues were that they couldn't see.
They also had no way to measure. Right.
They had no, that's why I think there's a,
Zero correction.
they couldn't correct, not the way, no, not,
Franklin didn't come about.
but like my brother, Al Vasham was, I mean, that guy was blind as a bat. I mean, he, without his glasses, he couldn't identify people, nothing. He just, yeah, you're the same. Yeah. So, okay. And then if that person's a summa, let's say that person's a summa, and then they have corrective lenses, are they no longer a summa or are they still a summa? That's not a Pashat Azach. It's not Pashat Azach. I've never heard of it
I
either.
wake up Suma and then.
Yeah. Mamish Pokech Ivrim every morning when you put on your glasses. Maybe that's why.
If you get your laser surgery.
These are, I'm not even saying these are shilas and poskim. I've never looked into the sugya. I'm just saying off the page, it bothers me that I don't know the answer, but that, do we say a summa is categorical, that they mamish see darkness or whatever they see, which I presume is darkness, because they can't bring in light. Okay, let's go. New Mishnah, halfway down, second of the wide lines, Pei Zayin and Aleph. Zeh chomer ba'adam b'shor. There is a chumrah of when a person hurts a person, as opposed to when a shor hurts a shor. Sheha'adam mishalem nezek tsar ripui sheves uboshes umishalem dmei vlados. If a man hurts someone, and the example in the Mishnah is if a man hurts a woman, he's obligated to pay 6 things. He's obligated to pay nezek tsar ripui sheves and boshes, which was really our Mishnah from a couple of days ago, which I believe was on the top of some previous page. My pages aren't turning well, but I believe it was on Pei Daled. Was it Pei Gimel? It was Pei Gimel. Okay, whatever it was. But over here, that's a chumrah by a man hurting another person, that he has to pay these 5 things. And if he damages a viable fetus, then he's obligated to pay for that as well. This we also learned earlier in the Masechta, that if a shor damages a person, he only has to pay for nezek. The Mishnah continues. Let's say that a child hits his father or mother in a way that hurts them, but there's no bruise. Or or if I give you a good dead arm with a bruise, even with a bruise on Yom Kippur, chayev bekulan. The reason why on Yom Kippur you're not going to be chayev, you're not going to be pater because of kamle b'derabamine, is because the halachic status of Yom Kippur and Shabbos are not the same, and the chabura that you would make on Yom Kippur is chayev kares and not chayev misa, which would otherwise be done biskila like on Shabbos. So therefore, there's no kamle by Yom Kippur. So you're chayev bekulan, you'd have to pay all of the appropriate chamesh, the 5 payments, nezek, tzar, ripui, sheves, and boshes. Hachovel be'eved ivri. Let's say I have an eved ivri, so he's a yid. Chayev bekulan. If I hurt him, then I have to pay all 5. Chutz min hasheves bizman shu shelo. I don't have to pay the eved sheves because I'm the one who loses out on the sheves. He's my employee, and I'm the one who caused the lack of. That's not good. Okay. Achovel be'eved kanani shel acherim. You can already see that this is jam-packed. These kinds of lines have a lot of factors. If I injure an eved kanani who belongs to someone else, chayev b'chulan. Rabbi Huda Omer ein le'avadim boshes. Rabbi Huda says that there is no busha for avadim. This seems a little bit like a party line, because Rabbi Yehuda just spent the last Amud teaching us that a summa also has no boshes. No boshes. He said that, yeah, right. And then the Mishnah continues. This part is pretty well known. When you engage with them, things are bad. Why? Because if you injure a cheresh or a shota v'katan, then you owe money. But but if they hurt you, they're completely pater. So let's play out a case scenario. You and a cheresh are in a fist fight, and you both punch each other at the same exact time and have the same exact damage. You both broke each other's left orbital bones right here. You just nailed it. Everybody's done. If I'm a pikeach, I have to pay you, and if you're a cheresh, you don't have to pay me. That's pigiyas ra. That even though the same exact thing happened between my damage to you and your damage, doesn't matter. Pigiyas ra. And as well, ha'eved v'ha'isha pigiyas ra. Also, to be engaged and involved with an eved or an isha, also getting involved with them is also not good, because hachovel bahem chayev. If I hurt an eved or an isha, I have to pay all five. But vehem shechavlu ba'acherim pturim. But an eved or an isha would not have to pay. This is under an assumption that a woman is somech al shulchan shel bala, and an eved, of course, has no money. Pashat, that's true. But this assumes that a woman is kind of the more typical shas scenario, where a woman is meshuba to her husband, and she gives her money to her husband, and he takes care of her with that money, as per the ksuba, which we saw very rigid dinim about Maseches ksuba.
Because she has.
Aval mashal and la'achar zman. Meaning, I will see. That's what the Mishnah continues exactly, David. Is that at a later point in her life, if the person who she injured has yet to be paid back, she'll have to pay later. Niskarsha ha'isha or nishtachrer ha'eved. If the woman becomes divorced or the eved becomes freed, chayav and l'shalem, when she is financially independent, or, and this is not listed, or if the dynamic of the marriage shifts where she keeps her paycheck, and then he doesn't have to feed her anymore. That there too, l'chora, the Mishnah doesn't say it. I'm jumping off the page, but l'chora, that would be the case.
She actually said that literally in simple words as can, that the two of them have nothing to pay.
Right, but
It's not a tour, just
it's kicking the can down the road. It's, yeah, exactly right. Okay, next case, 6-7 lines from the bottom of the page. Unlike our first case when we spoke about kibbud av v'em, good day for my dad not to be here, is if I were to hurt one of my parents with a chabura, or v'achovel b'chavero b'Shabbos, as opposed to Yom Kippur, pater mikulan, mipnei shehu nidon b'nafsho. Wow, not good. And these are the shilas of giving your father an injection and bruises, those kinds of things. I give myself an injection all the time, once a month, in my thigh. Not pleasant. If my father asked me to do so, would that be allowed? That's a big deal in the postgame. If you can do surgery on even if you're the expert, can you do surgery on a parent? Can you do a tooth extraction? Anything that can cause a chabura? You're chayav misa.
It's not an extraction.
Nothing.
Cleaning.
Even a cleaning. Nothing. Anything. Yeah. That's the pashtus. Is even if it's latovasa, right?
You would think actually the harmony will be the opposite, right? Because it's nichon.
It seems not. I mean, his father put him through dental school.
That's fantastic. Father's like, you make me bleed. You make. Wow. But that's the pashta, says that you are causing a chabura. You're causing damage. We have a din like this. Can a parent be mochel on their kavod? Like, could there be mechila of a chabura?
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
It would be a meal. For some reason, the father never had a meal on the son. How? That's a mitzvah.
That's a seder. That's a seder chelosase. That's a chora. That's a seder chelosase. Although the losase shabo was tsaras, but it shouldn't matter. The principle of a seder chelosase should apply to a.
Is it a guarantee? Is there a guarantee that you bleed? Everyone bleeds?
We have to.
It's technically speaking, there are ways to do circumcisions with zero blood. It is possible. If you do lasers, if you have certain shields and there are techniques. And technically speaking, a bris would still be kosher if there was no blood, but we're makbid on damil. So that's where this Bronstein clamp that came out, that I used to use them in the secular chevra. People told on me, but I had a masorah to use it under certain circumstances. It's a latch. It's basically a hinge device. It's a U-shaped hinge device that opens in the middle, and there's a hinge here at the bottom, and you put the orla in, and then you can clamp, close, and it latches very tight. It's a hemostatic clamp. it cuts off about 90 to 95% of the bleeding. As a Moel, it is fantastic. Big fan, makes my life a lot easier. So there were big shilas. The Rabbanut in Yerushalayim wrote a scathing letter about it 15 years ago or more. I don't remember exactly when. They're big hawk in the yeshiva belt. So I had a case scenario where a family was here and I did the bris. It was on Lunt. It was local, but they were driving in the car for 3.5 hours. That was part of my Masorah. You can use the Magain shield, as we refer to it. You can use the Magain when there's like a very long travel because it really does minimize risk. And the poskim are makel. Lemaisa, they're makel because there's no such thing as a circumcision without any blood. 2 days later, I was on the phone with Rabbi First about something else. He goes, "Oh, I got a phone call about you." I'm like, "Ooh, this doesn't sound good." I'm getting called to the principal's office. And he said, "Somebody said you use the Magain." I said, "I did. I have a Masorah to use it under certain circumstances." He said, "Okay, but I'm just letting you know that that if you use it, people are going to talk about you." I said, "Tell me it's usher, Rebbe." He said, "I can't tell you that it's usher, but I can tell you that people are going to talk about you." And then I spoke with Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz, Zichron Tzadik Livracha. I spoke to him, asked the same exact shaila. Nobody called him about me, but Baruch Hashem, that would have been awkward. He's my neighbor. So I said the same exact thing. I said, "Tell me it's usher." He said, "I cannot tell you that it's usher, but the yeshiva velt will not allow it to happen. So if you use it, people are going to talk about you." Same exact thing. So I said, "I don't understand. Why can't people just say that it's mutter?" He said, "I could, but it wouldn't help." He said, "It's already, the psak is bigger than halacha. You know, it's a yesh bazeh davar ma. If you leave it on for long enough, there might not be blood." But okay, let's continue. Good. Ve'achovel ve'eved kanani shelo. If I have an eved kanani and I am chovel on my own eved, pater mikulan. I don't have to pay anything. All right, let's get into a couple of halachic sugyas. 5 lines from the bottom on Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Ba minei Rebbe Lazar meirav. Hachovel bevas ktano shel acherim. If I were to create a chabala, if I were to injure somebody else's katana child, chabala lemi, who does the damage money go to? Does it go to the daughter or does it go to the father? Mi amrinan kevan de'akni le'rachman shvach neurim la'av. This we learned about in a previous Masechta, that shvach neurim, money that comes in for Kiddushin, any money that she makes as a child, because all of that goes to the Av, we therefore extend the father's rights from Shvach Neurim to Chabala Nami De'avu Ahave. My time, or why would we say that? Because if I were to injure your daughter, so then that lowers her value. Odilma, or perhaps we don't say that there's a link, an equivalence between Shvach Neurim and Chabala dollars. Odilma Shvach Neurim Udakne LeRachmana, only money of Shvach Neurim money she makes v'chulei and all of that. The Baile Mimsar Leila Mukashchin Matzi Maser. He has full rights even to marry her off to the least attractive person in town. He has the rights to do that because there's money involved and there's Kiddushin dollars involved. So he has all the rights there. Aval Chabala Kevan Di'ibai Mischabel Ba Lo Matzi Chabal. Since the father is not allowed to injure her, therefore Lo Kanyale Rachmana. Therefore, the Torah doesn't give the father the right to collect the Chabala dollars. So which one do we say? Amar Le, Rav said back, who asked the question? Rav said back to Rabbi Elazar. We're on the top of Pei Zayin Amud Beis. We're going to head to the top 3 lines of Pei Ches Amud Aleph. Amar Le lo zachsa Torah la'av el shvach neurim bilvad. We take the first approach in the Chakira presented on the bottom of the previous Amud, that a father only has access to shvach neurim, and therefore, if I were to break a tooth of someone else's child, the money goes to the child. It's a big chiddush in halacha. It's a big chiddush because that child doesn't even conceptually have a bank account. Okay, Esvei, the Gemara has a problem with this. Some say Meisvei. I don't know the difference between Esvei and Meisvei, but I know that they are both bringing sources from Tanaim to ask a question. And here's the Brisa. Hachovel be'eved ivri. We just learned in our Mishnah that if I'm chovel on an eved ivri chay bechulan, that I'm obligated to pay 4 out of the 5. Chutz min hasheves bizman shu shelo. I don't have to pay for sheves when he's working for me. Rashi explains how this question is fully articulated. Look at the 4th line of Rashi. V'hachanami kevan debito ma'aseh yadeha shelo lishkol sheves dida. He says that perhaps it should be the case that since the daughter, her ma'aseh yadayim go to him, so then he should be able to get her sheves. But that seems to not be what the previous case was. Why shouldn't the father get the Chabala? In this case of Hachovel Be'eved Ivri, we have a diuk about the daughter, the diuk that Rashi indicates that the father should at least get the Sheves. So Amar Abaye, Mode Rabbi Sheves, Tamaisi Adea Ad Shas Bagros De'avu Ahave. He does admit, Rav will admit that the Sheves of the daughter, because the Maise Yadeha is until Bagros, until that age, close to 12, he agrees that Sheves would go to the daughter. Esve, another question. Achovel bibno gadol. Let's say that I were to injure one of my children. Yitain lo miyad. So the child has to get paid right away. Bibno katan, if I were to injure a younger one of my children, yaase lo segula. What does that mean? Yaase lo segula. We'll see by the end of the day today, Mirz Hashem, what segula we're talking about. Achovel bebito ktana. This was our kasha. We wanted to know. Rabbi Lazar asks Rav, what about if I am chovel bebito ktana? The Gemara says, pater. At the very top of the page, though, we saw the shita of Rav, that Rav said that the father only gets shvach and urim, which means that the money goes to the daughter. So Rav said the money goes to the daughter. This piece of the brisa says, achovel bebito ktana pater. V'lo'od, not only that, ela shechavlo, v'lo'od, ela acherim shechavlu ba chayvan litem le'aviyah. We have a very explicit case over here where the money does go to the father taka. So that's a big problem. So the Gemara says, hachanami b'sheves. We're only talking over here about sheves. We're not talking about nezek. Sheves goes to the father, nezek goes to the daughter. So again, splits and bifurcation so that we have very, very nuanced cases. And this goes back a couple of days ago when we were discussing the interconnectedness between nezek and sheves. Do we say that is everything dependent on the nezek? What if there was no nezek and there was only boshes and all of those different iterations? The Gemara says 8 or 9 lines down at the 2 dots on Pei Zayin Amud Beis. Ubivno hagadol yiten lo miyad. We had said that if a father injures one of his older children, that the child gets paid right away. Hold on 1 second. Uriminu, we have a brisa. Hachovel bebanav uvivnosav shel acherim, gedolim yiten lehen miyad, ketanim yasalem skula. If I injure your children, then yes, I have to pay your older child immediately, and your younger child will get a segula. Again, we'll see what that means at the bottom of the page. But let's look here at the end of the brisa that questions our havamina. Bebanav uvnosav shelo pater. Over here, it says in the brisa, black on white, that if I were to injure one of my own older children, that I don't pay them miyad, I'm pater. So that's a problem, because the previous brisa had said that I would pay my son immediately if I hurt him. Masha'en came, this brisa says I would be pater if I hurt my son. So which one is it? Amre lo kasha. And here's where the lumdus kicks in. Kan kishe somchen al shulchano, kan kishe ein somchen al shulchano. When a child is somech an shulchano, there's no point in giving him money. His money is my money because he eats at my table. However, when we have kshein somchen an smuchen al shulchano, let's say that I were to have a very entrepreneurial child and he's raking it in, and he says, I don't want your food anymore, I'm keeping a separate cabinet with all of my food. He's not somech al shulchani anymore. And that child is the one that I injure, so then I have to pay him miyad. That's the distinction. So if I hurt an older child, there's no machlokes in the braysos. If my child is somech al shulchani, then I don't have to pay him if I injure him. If my child is not somech al shulchani, then I do have to pay him if I injure him. So says the Gemara, a third of the way down. Wait 1 second. B'mayu kimta. How did you just establish the kamaisa, this brisa? We just said that the brisa is b'she'ein smuchen al shulchano. That we said that b'she'ein smuchen al shulchano, when my son is not going to be on my table, when he doesn't rely on my food, then I have to pay him. Ihachi, then the ema seifa also has to be the same case where the child is ein somchen al shulchano. Let's see how that case reads. Hachovel bebito aktana pater, that if a man injures his own daughter who's a ktana, he's pater. V'lo'od ela acherem shechavlu ba, if other people were to injure my daughter, chayav and liten le'aviyah, they have to pay me the money. But why would they have to pay me the money? We just established this brisa as ein smuchen al shulchano, that the case was where she is not relying on my food. She has her own bank account. She has a job. She might be 10, but she has a babysitting job. She makes enough to eat her own food. So says the Gemara, why would the money go to her? The money should have gone to the ktana, because she has to pay for her own food. So if you're saying that the difference between Brisa number 1 and Brisa number 2 is Somech al Shulchanu, where one child is Somech al Shulchanu and one is not, that causes a big problem in this Brisa. Ve'afilu, second to the last of the short lines on Pei Zayin and base halfway down. Ve'afilu lemanda amar, even if you want to say, Yochel harav lomar le'eved asemi ve'nizancha, even in a case where you want to be able to say that a master can tell his eved, you're going to work for me, but I'm not going to sustain you. Hani mili be'eved kanani. That's not true by a yid, and it's not true by an isha. That's only true by an eved kanani. To amar le, ovid avid takula yoma, you will work for me all day. Ula zil sechar ve'achal. And at night, you have to go out, sell some stuff, and make some money for yourself. You're not a paid worker. You're a slave. But that's only true by an Eved Kanani. Aval Eved Ivri Dichsiv Kitov Lo Imach B'machal Imach B'mishtelo. You're not allowed to do that. Kol Shekain Bito. All the more so that will be true with the daughter. So even according to those who might want to say Asemi Veni Zancha, that doesn't apply to a woman. So we're back to our question of how can you say that the case is Ein Smuchen Al Shulchano and at the same time say she's not the one who gets the money, but the father does. So says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. She does get the primary money. In another place, as you can see on the side here, we saw this in Maseches Ksubis, that we're only talking about the extra money going to the father. You're absolutely right. In a case where a girl is ein somchen al shulchan of aviha, if a girl is 10 years old, she has a tremendous business, she's raking it in, and she goes to Jewel on her own, and she buys her own food. She's not somchen al shulchan of it, and that's my daughter, and then somebody hurts my daughter. You pay her the costs of damages. However, there might be extra money that goes beyond what she should get, beyond the amount that I would have otherwise given her. That money taka goes to the father. The mayu kimta lebasraisa. How did we explain the second brayso? So we had said it was bismuchen al shulchano. We had said earlier that if an older child is injured and he's somech al shulchano, that they're pater. So it says the Gemara, gedolam yiten lehen miyad ktanim yasalim segula. The Gemara says that the older child, they get paid right away, and the ketanim get this segula that we have yet to learn about. So there's somech al shulchano. How can the brayso say that yiten lehen miyad? Why does the money go to them? If there's somech al shulchano, then the money should go to the father. So Amri, the Gemara says, Kika kapid b'midi de kachaser. When is a father going to be makbid on collecting money? That's when there's a chisaron. B'midi de asame alma. But if something happens on its own, so then lo kapid. Says the Gemara, that's not true, because of hamitzia. Let's say one of my kids finds an expensive object. Halacha l'maisa, if one of my young children were to find a lost object, it's not theirs, it's mine, because they're somech al shulchanim. The Gemara says, Amre, revacha de ka'asilu me'alma, when something happens to my child, they get hurt, v'les lu'tzara de gufayu begava, and there is no pain. So in this case, if there's a revacha, if there's a gain, and it doesn't hurt, such as finding a lost object, kapi, the father's going to want to get it back. Abal Chabala, if one of my kids, Rahman al-Islan, if a child gets injured, the islu tzara de gufay ume alma ka'asilu lo kapit. Father's not going to want that money. If my kid gets hurt and there's a settlement, the kid can have the money. The kid can have the money. We have another case. We have the following case where you tried to lay down some rules that if there's tsar in the goof and it happened from an external source, that we would let the child keep the money. Here we see the kakapi, the katani, 8 lines from the bottom of the page on Pei Zayin and Beis. The katani v'lo od ela afilu acherem shechavlu bach hayavan litein le'aviha. We see that the money goes to the father here. Afal pi, that the child was the one that got hurt. Says the Gemara, Hamre hasam de gavra kapdanahu. Here the father's a jerk. The father is he's money hungry. He grabs every penny. Daha, how do we know this to be true? He doesn't let his kids eat from his table. He tells the kids from a young age, go get a job. Goodbye. I'm not feeding you after age 10. Go figure it out on your own. Then even if it were to happen on its own, the father would be makbid. But in our case, the lav gavra kaptanu, here the father's a nice guy. How do we know he's a nice guy? Because he lets him come to the Shabbos table. Smuchin al shulchano, parenting 101. I don't know how this works today about hard knocks. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you. But as far I feed my children, there's somech al shulchani, and it's very expensive. The smuchen al shulchano, they are that's how we know the father's a good guy. And then kika kapid b'mididika chaserle. When is the father makbid? Only when there's a loss to him. But if the child just got hurt and the person says, "Look, I'm really sorry. Here's $1,000," the kid can keep the $1,000. But b'midi de asilu me'alma lo kapid. My segula, what is this segula that we were saying that a child would get? If a child does get hurt, we should get them a segula. Chizda Amar, yikes. Buckle up. Sefer Torah. Just a small $50,000 and a year of work for some sofer. Rabbi Baravuna Amar, Dikla de Achel Mine Tamrin. A palm tree. A little bit less expensive, I presume. I've never purchased one. I don't know. The Gemara jumps back into our sugya and says that Reish Lakish is of the opinion, back to our initial shaila, that there's only shvach neurim. That if I were to injure someone else's daughter, the money that goes to the father is only shvach neurim, but injury money always goes to the daughter. Rav Yochanan Amar afilu ptzia, even a low-level type of injury. So the Gemara is now already splitting hairs. There's a stronger level of injury called a ksifa, where there's like a real injury, a chabala, where you really hurt someone, and a psia is lower level. Says the Gemara, psia sal kadaitach, really? I feel Rabbi Lazar lo kami baile ela chabala. Even Rabbi Lazar wasn't so happy about this idea unless there was a chabala. The ifcha sami kaspa, because when there's a chabala, that really does lower her cost. Aval ptsia, but when there's a low-level injury, the lo ifcha sami kaspa, it's a bruise, it's going to go away. Lo kami baile, it's no stitches. Again, I don't know where the halachic lines are between ptsia, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just giving as an example. There's a difference between elbowing someone in the face and giving them a little bruise, a little black eye, and cutting their face open and them needing, some jagged Frankenstein stitches. Those are very different. So then says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, you're right, but shepatza b'faneha ve'ifcha sami kaspa. The Gemara says, yeah, but the face got injured. When the face gets injured, things are different. And ve'ifcha sami kaspa. When a person's face is injured, it's different than when they have a bruise on their arm. That's why the Gemara makes this distinction. We'll stop right here. Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow with Peiches Amud Aleph, 3 lines down, 4 lines down. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
You're faster.